A plane vanishes mid-flight, no crash, no signal, no wreckage. What really happened to MH370? The truth is more shocking than you think. The dense green jungles of Southeast Asia hold secrets few humans have ever seen. Some believe one of those secrets is the final resting place of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. It's a theory that refuses to fade. What if the Boeing 777 didn't crash into the ocean at all, as many people say? What if it veered off course, flew low under radar, and eventually ran out of fuel, crashing silently into the thick, uncharted forest, somewhere deep in a remote part of Southeast Asia, maybe in Cambodia or northern Malaysia? Think about it. Some parts of those jungles are so untouched by civilization you could hide an entire town and no one would know. Satellite images have circulated online. In one of the most shared photos, hidden beneath the dense canopy, you can spot what looks like the outline of a plane. It sparked a frenzy. Some believed it was MH370, others dismissed it as shadows or a trick of the foliage. But the image was enough to make people look twice. Aviation experts and online sleuths zoomed in, traced outlines, analyzed flight paths. What if the plane came down there and we just haven't reached it yet? Now here's where things get strange. A disturbing story began spreading not long after the ghost cabin theory. According to this idea, the plane didn't disintegrate in midair, it didn't explode. It stayed intact through the crash, and inside that sealed cabin the passengers never left their seats. The theory claims that due to a sudden loss of cabin pressure, everyone on board lost consciousness within minutes. With no one awake to guide it, the plane flew on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and crashed, possibly gently enough to keep the fuselage mostly intact. And because of the thick jungle and remote location, no one has ever found it. It just vanished. Here's the chilling part. In this theory, the bodies inside remained seated, still strapped in. Over time, nature reclaimed the wreckage. Trees grew around it, wildlife moved in. The passengers became like statues, preserved by the sealed air inside, mummified by the elements. Of course, this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but this theory pulls in parts of real science too. Planes have been found years after crashes in jungles, and for those who believe in this version of events, MH370 is still out there. Not at the bottom of the ocean, not blown to pieces, still whole, waiting quietly in a green tomb, far from any eyes. The kind of place only satellites or the rarest drone might one day rediscover. But now let's talk about the theory most experts still point to, the Southern Indian Ocean. On paper, it's the most logical explanation. But even this so-called official version leaves people scratching their heads. Here's what we know. After MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, everything seemed normal. Then, not long after entering Vietnamese airspace, the plane suddenly disappeared from civilian radar. No mayday call, no distress signal, just gone. But military radar picked up something odd. An unknown aircraft turning sharply off course, heading west over the Strait of Malacca. It didn't match the flight path at all. Many believe that was MH370. Then came tiny satellite communications between the plane and a satellite called Inmarsat, which kept pinging for hours after the plane vanished from radar. The data suggested MH370 flew for about 6 more hours before finally plunging into the ocean. But the location those pings point to is one of the most isolated places on Earth. We're talking about the Southern Indian Ocean, a stretch of water so empty and vast even cargo ships rarely pass through it. If you wanted to disappear something forever, this is the place you'd pick. And that's exactly where investigators believe the plane went down, over 1,500 miles off the coast of Western Australia. Search teams launched one of the largest ocean hunts in history. They combed thousands of square miles, deployed deep-sea sonar and underwater drones. They found nothing. For years, not a single trace. Then finally, some debris started turning up. Not in the drop zone, but scattered across beaches in Madagascar, Reunion Island, and Mozambique. A flaperon, a wing flap, some interior panels. Experts say these parts almost certainly came from a Boeing 777 and matched MH370. So why didn't they find the main wreckage in the area they searched? That's the mystery. Maybe the plane glided farther than expected. Maybe the ocean currents scattered it. Or maybe it never actually crashed there. That's where conspiracy starts creeping in. Some people think the data was faked, that the satellite signals were manipulated to hide the real location, that someone didn't want this plane to be found. Others believe the crash site is real, but the ocean itself is hiding the evidence. The Southern Indian Ocean is known for its brutal underwater terrain, deep trenches, jagged ridges, and powerful currents. If the plane sank into one of those canyons, it could still be intact on the seafloor 15,000 feet below the surface. That's deeper than the Titanic. Some parts of that seabed have never even been mapped. This theory is scary in its own way, not because it's supernatural, but because it shows how vulnerable we still are. In a world filled with satellites and GPS, a massive airliner may be vanished in an ocean no one watches, and we still don't know exactly where it is. What if Flight MH370 was never in the pilot's control at all? What if someone somewhere took over the plane without ever stepping on board? This is the core of one of the most gripping and unsettling theories, the cyber hijack hypothesis. The idea is simple but terrifying. Modern planes, including the Boeing 777, are flying computers. They rely on complex avionics systems, autopilot, satellite communications, and digital navigation. And like any system that runs on code, it can be hacked. Some cyber experts have claimed that MH370 could have been remotely accessed through its Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, or ACARS. This system sends automated messages between the aircraft and ground stations, including engine data and position updates. And here's the thing, ACARS was manually turned off during MH370's flight. Not crashed, not glitched, manually disabled. That's a red flag for many. If someone had gained access to the system, they could have rerouted the plane, disabled communications, and even locked the pilots out of key controls. The cockpit door was already reinforced after 9/11, making it nearly impossible to breach from the cabin. But what if the threat didn't come from the passengers? What if it came from a laptop across the world? There are claims, though never officially confirmed, that Boeing aircraft have a remote takeover mode in extreme emergencies. It's designed to let ground operators land the plane safely if the crew becomes incapacitated. Boeing has denied this publicly, but the rumor lives on. Could someone have exploited such a backdoor? One name always pops up when this theory is mentioned: Philip Wood. He was an American tech executive on MH370, reportedly carrying sensitive data. Some theorists believe he was a target, and that the plane was hijacked digitally to intercept something, or someone, on board. But what? If MH370 really was hijacked remotely, the next question is why? Why this flight, out of all others? Why fly it off course, disable communications, and send it vanishing into the most remote parts of the world? That's where the cargo conspiracy comes in, and things start to get even stranger. Flight MH370 wasn't just carrying passengers. According to the official cargo manifest, the plane was transporting over 5 tons of electronic equipment, including lithium-ion batteries, radio accessories, and communication devices. On paper, it all seems routine, but parts of the manifest raised eyebrows. Some of the cargo wasn't properly screened, and some items were labeled in vague terms like electrical equipment without detailed explanation. Now here's where it links back to Philip Wood, the tech executive who was traveling on MH370. He worked for IBM, and some online investigators claim he had access to sensitive defense-related data, possibly involving advanced microchips or surveillance systems. Whether or not that's true, the theory says MH370 wasn't targeted for who was on board. But what? Some believe the plane was transporting classified technology, possibly related to military communications or radar-evading components. The kind of equipment you don't want falling into the wrong hands. And if someone did want it, whether a state actor, a private group, or something in between, intercepting the cargo mid-flight would have been the perfect opportunity. There's even speculation that the plane was being followed, that another aircraft was trailing MH370 at a high altitude, outside radar range, guiding it toward a controlled crash, or an emergency landing, somewhere off-grid. In this version of events, the cargo is removed, the plane is either destroyed or hidden, and the official story is buried under a pile of satellite data and inconclusive investigations. If Flight MH370 was carrying something it shouldn't have, or something someone desperately wanted to keep from reaching Beijing, what would the response look like? Some believe we already saw it, just not on the news. This is the heart of the shadow military interception cover-up theory. Building off the cargo conspiracy, this theory suggests MH370 was never meant to reach its destination, that the flight was quietly intercepted, possibly by military aircraft, before being taken down or redirected without warning. The motivation? Sensitive or unauthorized cargo, possibly experimental tech, possibly something involving global security interests. Either way, someone wanted it stopped. According to several radar data sources, MH370 performed a strange turn westward shortly after disappearing from civilian tracking. It flew back across the Malay Peninsula and into one of the busiest military zones in the region, right through areas monitored by Thai, Malaysian and even US allied forces. And yet, no one said a word. That silence? It speaks volumes to some theorists. If MH370's cargo included unregistered military tech, perhaps something under embargo or quietly moved for covert research, then the route alone might have triggered a response. The plane's disappearance just happens to align with several known air defense corridors. The idea is that either Malaysian or allied forces detected the rogue signal and scrambled fighters to intercept. Here's where things get darker. Some believe the intercept went too far, that the plane was shot down by mistake or forced to land in secret, that the wreckage was either sunk deliberately or never released to the public. Why? Because admitting a military error like that, or worse, a preemptive strike, could spark global outrage and political disaster. Others say the military knew about the flight deviation but couldn't risk public involvement. It's easier to create a mystery than explain a geopolitical accident. Think about it. If multiple nations tracked MH370, why did none of them release full radar logs? Why did key information only surface years later in bits and pieces? Even eyewitnesses on islands in the Indian Ocean have claimed they saw a low-flying jet the same night MH370 vanished. One report from the Maldives described a white jumbo jet with red markings roaring overhead, flying unusually low. That description matches MH370. If flight MH370 was intercepted mid-air under mysterious circumstances, as some believe, then the most logical question is, where did it go? One theory has an answer so secretive, so perfectly isolated, it seems made for a story like this. Diego Garcia. This tiny atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean isn't just a speck on the map, it's home to one of the most heavily guarded US military bases on Earth. And according to many believers of the military interception theory, this is where MH370 might have ended up. Let's connect the dots. The altered flight path after MH370 vanished from civilian radar, put it back across Malaysia and into the Indian Ocean where military radar continued to track it. The route, not far from Diego Garcia. It's roughly 2,300 miles southwest of Malaysia, a long shot for a wounded or hijacked plane, but not impossible for a Boeing 777 running on autopilot. Now, if a military intercept took place, and authorities didn't want to risk downing a civilian aircraft over water, redirecting it to a secure location would make more sense, a place away from cameras, away from witnesses. Diego Garcia fits that bill better than anywhere else. Some say the plane was forced to land there under classified orders, that the sensitive cargo discussed earlier, possibly related to defense tech, was removed quietly. Others believe the passengers were held temporarily, then the plane dismantled and sunk, leaving behind no evidence. It's a disturbing theory, but it lingers because of the silence. Adding to the mystery, there were reports, unverified but persistent, of a phone signal pinging from Diego Garcia shortly after the plane's disappearance. Some claim it came from Philip Wood's phone, the same tech executive linked to the cargo conspiracy. The message supposedly said he was being held on a US base and smuggled it out using hidden metadata. The story was dismissed as a hoax, but for many, it was one clue too many. Could MH370 have landed on an island so classified that its presence could be wiped from records? Could a mistake or covert operation be so damaging, it demanded full silence from every government involved? It sounds like something out of a spy movie. But, in a world where secrecy often masks truth, Diego Garcia has become the perfect symbol of what could be hiding behind the curtain. Not everything lost stays lost by accident. At this point, we've covered theories grounded in technology, politics, and secrecy. But there's one idea that reaches far beyond the limits of our current understanding. What if flight MH370 didn't just disappear from Earth's surface, but from time itself? This is the most exotic, most mind-bending theory out there, the SpaceTime Anomaly. According to this idea, MH370 may have flown into a natural rift in the fabric of space and time, a kind of portal, a glitch in the Matrix, a moment where the rules of physics don't apply. As wild as that sounds, the Indian Ocean has long been tied to stories of unexplained phenomena. Much like the Bermuda Triangle, this part of the world has been home to missing ships, strange lights, and bizarre weather events for centuries. Some sailors have even reported electrical fog that messes with compasses and causes time distortions. Could MH370 have flown into something like that? And then, the truly strange part, a few reports claim MH370 was spotted years after it vanished. One of the most controversial sightings came from a group of fishermen off the coast of the Maldives. They described seeing a massive jet flying unusually low over the ocean. No markings, no sound of distress, just a silent machine cutting through the sky, flying a direction no commercial airline would ever take. Others believe the plane may reappear, literally. Like something out of a science fiction story, they think MH370 will come back at some point in the future. Maybe a year from now, maybe 100. Frozen in time, untouched by decay with passengers who haven't aged a second. It's the kind of idea you'd expect in an episode of The Twilight Zone. But it keeps people talking. Some even tie this theory to strange noises picked up in the southern Indian Ocean. Low metallic sounds, pulsing frequencies, signals that don't match any natural source. Were these echoes of a torn dimension? Glitches from something that briefly left our world? MH370's story is wrapped in silence. A flight that seemed so ordinary became a global obsession. A haunting question that won't go away. The SpaceTime Anomaly theory may be far-fetched, but then again so is a 270-ton airliner disappearing off the face of the Earth. Well, if a time portal theory for MH370 sounds too wild, wait until you hear about a plane that vanished and landed 35 years later with skeletons still on board. Let's dive into the strangest plane disappearances in history. You may have never heard of Santiago Flight 513, but once you do, you'll never forget it. The story has lived for decades in aviation lore. Some call it urban legend, others are convinced it's real. Either way, it's impossible to ignore. And the way it connects to what we just discussed with MH370? Unsettling. The story begins in 1954, when Santiago Airlines Flight 513 took off from Aachen, West Germany, on a routine route to Porto Alegre, Brazil. It was a long-haul flight but a completely normal one for the time. The plane, a Lockheed Super Constellation, took off with 88 people on board. Crew, families, businessmen, all expecting to land in South America by nightfall. But the plane never made it. It vanished over the Atlantic Ocean. No radio contact, no distress call, no trace. Just like that, gone. Authorities launched a search, but not a single piece of wreckage was ever found. The incident was quietly closed, labeled a tragic loss over open water. Families mourned, and the world moved on. Then something absolutely bizarre happened. In October 1989, a plane suddenly appeared in the skies over Porto Alegre, Brazil. It circled the airport several times, ignoring radio calls from the tower. The control tower watched in confusion as this vintage aircraft, not seen in commercial service for decades, lined up for landing and touched down perfectly on the runway. Security rushed to the aircraft. What they found would send shivers through aviation history. According to reports, the cabin was intact. The engines were still running, and inside, every single person was still in their seat. But they were nothing more than skeletons. No sign of decay, no signs of trauma, just 88 perfectly placed human remains, frozen in time. Some say the plane flew through a time distortion, a rip in space where time passes differently, like a bubble in the sky, that it was trapped there for over 3 decades before finally returning to Earth. There are skeptics, of course. No official records from Santiago Airlines survive. The Brazilian government has never confirmed the story. And yet, details of the event have circulated since the 80s. True or not, what makes the Santiago 513 story so compelling is how closely it mirrors the questions we ask about MH370. Could a plane really vanish? Not because of mechanical failure or sabotage, but because it left our reality altogether. Could MH370 still be flying, somewhere beyond what we understand? If Santiago 513 returned 35 years later, could MH370 one day do the same? It's an idea that creeps under your skin, and it's only the beginning. Before there was MH370, there was Amelia Heheart, the most famous pilot in history and the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. But it was her final journey in 1937 that became one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time. While attempting to circle the globe in her Lockheed Electra, Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan, vanished somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. Radio contact was lost, and no confirmed trace of the aircraft was ever found. But here's where it gets strange. Some researchers believe Heheart didn't crash into the sea at all. One theory claims she landed on a tiny island called Nikumororo, surviving for a time as a castaway. Bones and objects found there hint at the possibility. Yet another theory takes things further, suggesting she may have been captured by foreign forces, possibly taken to Saipan, and died in custody. If that's true, her disappearance wasn't an accident, it was a cover-up. Even decades later, documents and eyewitness accounts still surface, keeping the mystery alive. What really happened to Amelia Heheart? Did she die alone on an island, or did someone erase her from history? One of the most legendary vanishings in aviation didn't involve one plane. It involved 5. In 1945, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger bombers, collectively called Flight 19, departed from Fort Lauderdale for a training mission over the Atlantic. Everything was routine, until radio contacts started breaking up. The pilots sounded confused. Their compasses stopped working. They didn't know where they were. And then, silence. The entire formation disappeared. No debris, no survivors, nothing. Even more chilling, the rescue plane sent to find them also vanished. The military launched one of the largest air-sea searches in history, but Flight 19 was gone. Over time, this incident helped give birth to the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, a mysterious zone where planes and ships reportedly vanish without explanation. Some blame magnetic anomalies, others suggest freak storms or even time slips. Whatever the cause, the case remains open to this day. 5 planes, trained pilots, perfect weather, and no return. The Bermuda Triangle keeps its secrets well. In 1962, a military charter plane called Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 vanished over the Pacific with 107 people on board, including soldiers headed to Vietnam. It took off from Guam, expected to land in the Philippines. But somewhere along the way, it disappeared, without a distress call, without radar loss, without a single trace of wreckage. The plane was a Lockheed Super Constellation, a sturdy 4-engine aircraft. The weather was clear, the crew was experienced, yet nothing was ever found, not a seat cushion, not a wing, not a life vest. Commercial vessels in the area saw a bright flash in the sky around the time of the disappearance, but no crash site was ever located. What's even more puzzling? The US government quickly classified parts of the investigation. Some believe the plane may have been carrying sensitive cargo, or personnel with knowledge of covert operations. Was it sabotage? Was the plane downed intentionally? Or did it simply fall into one of the ocean's deepest, darkest trenches? More than 60 years later, families still have no answers, just silence. That's about it. Are you afraid to fly an airplane? Let me know in the comments. For more useful information, watch other videos.